Is Christianity being wiped out in the Middle East and in Africa? And if so, what, if anything, can the West truly do about it? We're talking about it with the acclaimed and outspoken actor John Rhys Davies on this edition of Politics. Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King, and recently I sat down for a fascinating and wide-ranging interview with the acclaimed actor John Rhys Davies, best known for his roles in the blockbuster Lord of the Rings trilogy, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Blake Edwards' Victor Victoria. He stopped by to talk about his latest movie, Return to the Hiding Place. But he's also an incredibly blunt and outspoken advocate for Christianity and a critic of much of the way the West is responding to what he calls a war on Christians in the Middle East and Africa. We'll get into that eventually in this interview. But first, here's the beginning of the conversation with an extraordinary man. Was there any fallout from the comments you made recently on our friend Adam Carolla's podcast? You said we have lost our moral compass completely. Unless we find it, we're going to lose our civilization. We're going to lose Western European Christian civilization anyway. What were you fearful of, John?
Well, the West has a great liberal tradition of taking in refugees. Right at the moment, we are inundated with refugees in Europe. The latest Soviet intervention probably means a further 4 million Syrians are going to try and come in. Now, we have a moral obligation to help, but at the same time, that level of permanent migration, with a population so young, is going to end up effectively replacing the indigenous population. There are two populations in Europe. For 50 years, Europeans have had contraception. Their family size has fallen to below replacement level. My generation didn't have enough. My son's generation haven't had enough, and their son's generation haven't had. The average age of the European population is well into its 40s, 47, 48. The new migrant population, average age of about 25, 26, maybe 27. So what we're going to see is replacement. But what I fear is not so much the replacement of one people by another, but the replacement of Western European Christian civilization with Islamic civilization. Now, if you look at the numbers as they are, you would say this is fanciful. This is a threat that doesn't really exist, because no one understands that there is a death rate about to take place in Europe. The baby boomers present a huge portion of our population. This year, they start to reach the age of about 70. And when that huge hunk of our population dies out over the next 10 years, the relative proportions of indigenous to non-indigenous Europeans will change radically.
So, but
the large and
John, isn't it a very Christian thing to take them in?
Yes.
So you have a dichotomy, don't you?
You have a dilemma of the first order. I mean, first of all, you can say, well, there are two sorts. There are the economic migrants, and those we ought to be able to separate from genuine migrants fleeing persecution. But we have to find a way of doing justice to real refugees, and at the same time preserving what I think are really important values. I think Western European Judeo-Christian civilization has brought the world more pluses than minuses. And I mean, if you get back to this film, this film is about basically Dutch Christians who decided that they would not allow Jews to be deported. And a group of very motivated young men and women fought against the Germans and hid up to, I believe, 47,000 Jews. Now, don't forget, this is not just a question of, oh, stick them somewhere and we can look after, nobody will look. There were searches. And if you got caught concealing somebody, the odds are that not just you, but your family would be put to death. And that's a sort of challenge that I wonder whether you and I would actually be prepared to meet.
That same horrid Nazi regime, which did Anne Frank, I believe, was in Holland, and I'm anxious to see return to the hiding place. That same Nazi regime would not have taken in refugees, would they?
No.
So then a further dichotomy. Yes, Poland was wonderful in protecting the Jews, but
yep.
Germany. What do you want? Do you want them not to come in? You say some are good, some are bad. How do you differentiate? What
I didn't say that.
What do you want the West to do?
I think the West has got to find a foreign policy to begin with. Right at the moment, Putin is the hero of the peace. Putin is the man who is going to sort all this out. And there is a vacuum in Western political thinking that is being filled by Mr. Putin. And I don't think that ultimately will be of any good to the rest of us. But the other thing that really troubles me is the actual persecution of Christians, particularly in northern Iraq. The Yazidi group, who are being assaulted in the most barbaric ways, who are actually being enslaved. And nobody is raising a shout for them. When I say enslaved, I don't mean the sort of forms of enslavement that we in the West talk about. Well, sex trade slaving or economic slavery or something like that. I mean taking people and using them for whatever purpose you need. And treating them in any way because they do not belong to Islam.
So you say the West. What specifically do you mean? The cumulative West, America? What do you want? What do you want to happen?
I would like to hear a bit more of a moral shout from ordinary people. And I would like to see every church in this country saying, this is not good enough. We've got to put pressure on our governments to be more proactive and to literally declare, that we will not tolerate it and that we will intervene and stop it.
Intervene with troops on the ground, with killings on top. What's your solution?
There are lots of good men in Washington and in London and in other places who spend their nights worrying about these things. I'm not going to tell your government what to do. I don't have that right. All I know is that unless we stand up and are counted, we are complicit as the population of Europe was when they said, well, we know things are happening to the Jews, but, what can we do about it? It's out of our control. Return to the Hiding Place is an example of what young people, bound together by real values and with real determination can do to stop a moral outrage.
Who do you play?
And I'd like to see that.
Who do you play?
I play a very worried Jew who is completely surprised that these Christians should have any interest in protecting me, and really doesn't really understand why.
On the global scale, do you fear ISIS getting bigger?
Oh yes, ISIS is the perfect vehicle for every, Islamic teenage psychopath. I mean, it gives you the freedom to, or at least appears to give you the freedom to kill, and if you die, you go to heaven. That would seem to be pretty attractive.
You're very strong about political correctness. You recently co-wrote an article with director Peter Spencer entitled Tolerance of Persecution is No Virtue. You close saying, tolerating evil is not some kind of better or more evolved trait, as many would try to convince you. The manifest truth remains that tolerating evil creates intolerance toward all freedom. When good men do nothing, that is correct. You're completely correct. So what do you blame for the political correctness we're living under? You warn against universities, media, progressives. Who is responsible for being politically correct when the term sounds okay?
It does, doesn't it? We really do have to stand and redefine what we mean by political correctness, because it's nonsense. We're afraid of speaking out about anything. Do you know, freedom of speech actually means the right to say things that will upset some people.
Right.
That's really what we mean by freedom of speech. Now, I would offset that by simply saying, if you're claiming a freedom, you have to assert a responsibility. And that responsibility is to try and choose your words as well as you can, and not to be abusive, and not to be, bitchy or provoking or vicious or vindictive. But I'm not sure, actually, that the right of free speech is contingent on that. As I say, I think the right of free speech actually is the right to offend some people.
Of course.
But the other thing is, not only are people not afraid of saying something that can be construed as offensive to some group, some way. The truth of the matter is we're running out of solutions or suggested solutions to problems that can be spoken of clearly and freely. Sometimes we have to, in order to think of new ways of confounding things, we have to risk saying things that will upset people.
More on this very important topic with John Rhys Davies. His latest movie is Return to the Hiding Place, which to me sounds like a very important film to see. We'll be right back. We're back with John Rhys Davies, the acclaimed actor, appeared in many great films. His latest is Return to the Hiding Place, about Christians hiding Jews in the Netherlands in World War II. For many years, this country, the United States, was viewed as a beacon of democracy and inspiration. Do you think we've lost that?
No, I don't, actually. I think you still are the last best hope for mankind. But I think, we are in a muddle. Machiavelli actually says there are two ways of contending, one in accordance with the law, the other by force. The first of which is proper to men, the second to beasts. But since the first method is not completely effective, it becomes necessary to resort to the second. A prince, therefore, must understand how to use well the man and the beast. And our problem is, in the West, our princes do not understand that there is a beast. And if you don't understand that, you're going to be stymied in dealing with the real events of life. Some problems are not amenable, cannot be solved by gentleness and reasonable sitting down and talking. Some problems really stem from absolutely implacable opposition to you and your values and your ideas. And a good prince must weigh the consequences of war and the consequences of feet on the ground against allowing terror, allowing persecution to flourish.
So you think we, the West, are standing by idly?
I know that some work is being done covertly, but really, this is something that should unite us all. You know, I'm damned if I'm going to sit round in a world that will sort of turn its eye to a new form of slavery of the worst sort. I'm outraged when I see published on the internet Islamic justifications for slavery. This is the 21st century. Slavery is an abomination. And you and I, we have friends of all colors, all creeds. And we don't fuss about the details of faith and belief and things like that. But I have to tell you, for me, slavery is a litmus test. If your faith in any way can justify slavery, then I don't think there is a place for you in my society. I do not want to share a society with you.
Do you think there is such a thing, as you look at this muddle, as you call it, there is such a thing as victory in the Middle East?
You know, I was in Sweden the other day, and I was having sort of this debate, and my taxi driver was standing around near me, and when it was over, he came up to me and he said, "John, you're overlooking the obvious thing, aren't you?" And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, you know, I'm from Kurdistan." He said, "There will be no peace in the Middle East as long as there is Islam." I said, "But you're a Muslim." He said, "Yes. There is something in the nature of Islam that we are not prepared to recognize, and this is our own political fear, our own fear of being politically incorrect, and more than that, politically insensitive. But there is something in Islam that is belligerent, offensive, insidious, and ideologically opposed to all the values that we believe."
In the whole faith?
Well, you would exclude the Sufi, I believe, though their adoration, because the Sufi are an extraordinary bunch of spiritual people. But no, not in the whole faith. But there are contradictions in the whole faith. You know, if Islam is the last, if Muhammad is the last prophet, and nothing that he says or does can really be contradicted, it can be interpreted, then you're always going to have people coming back like these ISIS people and saying, but in fact, slavery is justified because, you know, in the Medina surahs, you know, the Prophet ordered his people to go out to kill and convert and enslave non-believers. And the sad thing about it is the Muslims that I know and like and love are really uncomfortable with saying, yeah, but, you know, they say, "John, but, you know, this is past history and all those things." But they won't dare to say it's wrong.
Do you see?
Because if you...
Yeah, I see it. You make strong points. Do you see any leader in America, in Britain, on the horizon, currently present, who can lead us into a concept of leadership in your way of thinking?
I'm not going to tell Americans how to vote. I'm not going to get involved in that partisan stuff. I'm a guest in your country, and I don't have any rights to do that. All I will say is there aren't in my country. My country is pretty morally vacuous. There is still moral argument in the United States. It's almost vanished from Europe, and that really worries me. And we need an America that still has a moral vision, and a moral heart.
Do you think you can get the moral compass back?
Yes, of course you can. The fact that, a bunch of young students, teenagers effectively, could stand up against the force of Nazi Germany out of principle, out of moral principle, and be that effective, as you'll see in this little movie, it shows that it's always possible. The young sometimes have courage that the old don't have. But the old really have to stand up and speak sometimes. Tolerance, allowing people to live and let live, is wonderful and essential. But there are times when you have to stand up and be counted, because otherwise you will lose your civilization.
What about those?
And we're at risk.
What about those who say, well, why we're comfortable in America and the West? Why should we care about Syria?
I share that absolute belief that, that all these places are hellholes. But we're going to see the extinction of Christianity in the Middle East literally within the next few years. It's almost all gone anyway. And Christianity offers a different set of values. Now, it sounds as if I'm a proselytizing Christian. I have to say, I'm not good enough to call myself a Christian anyway. And certainly the conduct of my life would certainly make lots of sensible Christians' eyebrows raise. But there is something about Christianity that does offer hope. From early Christianity, we got the right of free speech, the right of the individual conscience, that the emperor does not have the right to tell us how we must believe in our hearts. And from that whole right of the individual to have his own opinions has grown. The great triumph of Christianity was actually the notion that we are not beholden to kings, that we are the democracy, the right of everyone to make a wise choice in the election of government is there. And of course, the jewel in the crown is the abolition of slavery. And to be a part of a generation that is allowing it to come back without comment and outrage. I tell you, if you're a black person in this country and you are not outraged about this, then a lot of your ancestors would be wringing their hands and weeping in shame.
Why did these people in your movie, why were they different from other people in Eastern Europe who did not do what they did? These are Christians who hid Jews. Why didn't other Christians do that in other states?
Well, I suppose at any time there's 5% who will fight for the Germans, 5% who will fight against the Germans, and 90% who will say, well, let's see who's going to win this one.
Are you you can't be optimistic.
Well,
doesn't sound.
Mike. No, I'm not sounding. I'm not sounding optimistic, but I'm not sounding. We are going to lose Western European Judeo-Christian civilization. The demography is already in place. My generation's cavalier attitude to all the history that had gone before, and that wonderful 60s certainties that, we were going to make the world in a different shape, we overlooked the obvious, and our politicians overlooked the obvious. Truth of the matter is, in terms of our relative numbers, we are lost, and we're going to lose. We're going to lose it. But there are other places that can still hold on, and America is certainly one of them. But am I optimistic that something will be done? You bet. You bet. Because our leaders may have lost their moral compass, but actually, deep down, in the grassroots and in our guts, we can smell the difference between right and wrong. And there's a damn sight more people who actually understand what is right than those who are prepared to tolerate wrong.
John, a pleasure talking with you. Can we do it again sometime?
I hope so, sir, and I hope to do it in person with you next time.
Me too. And the movie is Return to the Hiding Place. Our guest, John Rhys Davies. Thank you so much. For more information on Return to the Hiding Place, check out hidemovie.com. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Politicking. Remember, you can join the conversation on my Facebook page. Check out the Politicking blog on our homepage, or tweet me at King's Things. And don't forget, use the Politicking hashtag. That's it for this edition of Politicking.